have you all together again for this month's webinar. The topic today is modern best practices for software development, and the reason we picked a topic, this is roughly around 10-year mark for Agile development. And you all know who are practitioners of Agile, a lot of good practices have evolved and come into practice in software development from bottom-up process. And many of these practices end up getting categorized under the Agile techniques category. And what we thought today we will do is take some of these practices which we have understood and concluded as really sound practices for good quality software development, regardless of the fact whether you consider yourself an Agile techniques follower or not. So that's what we'll do today, talk about a number of these really good solid software development techniques that have evolved in the last 10 years or so, and cover them, and you can use these techniques regardless of whether you consider yourself Agile or not. And the process-wise, we'll have presentation for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll leave another 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. But if you have questions along the way, keep sending them in the question-answer panel on your go-to webinar panel, and I'll keep track of them and pick those questions which are broadly applicable and relevant, and have our presenter Damon answer them. So with that, let me introduce our presenter. I'm delighted to have Damon Poole with us today. Damon is the founder and CTO of AccuRev, which is a leading provider of software development tools for I remember at the recent Agile conference, at the Agile Alliance World Conference, was standing room only. So I'm delighted to have Damon with us on our webinar series to talk about this topic of modern software practices. With that, Damon, I'm going to turn it over to you and make you the presenter, and then at the appropriate time, you can turn it back to me.
Okay, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Hemant. I appreciate that, and let's get started here. Okay, so as Hemant said, there are a lot of practices out there that are really new in the last 10 years, I would say. Some of them perhaps a little bit further back, but let's just stick with 10 years. And some of these you might associate with Agile development, but a lot of them are being adopted regardless of methodology or anything like that. So, refactoring, you see that in the Eclipse IDE and Visual Studio IDEs as a built-in thing. Unit tests, people are doing that a lot, right? Continuous integration, stuff like that. Some of the things that you might not have thought of as being applicable to traditional development or whatever you want to call your process are things like user stories, one-piece flow, whole teams, multi-stage CI, backlog, burn-up chart, velocity, and planning poker. But they really can be, and I've seen a lot of people adopting these practices regardless of their methodology. So with that, let's get started here. And I wanted to point out that a number of these practices do actually have whole books written on them. And if you want to learn more about them, of course, feel free to check those out. A lot of good books out there. Okay. So let's back up a step to begin with and talk about what is it that we do regardless of our methodology, right? If we're going to produce something, we need to specify what it is. We have to do some amount of design, that kind of thing, because code doesn't just pop out of nowhere, right? We're doing it for some reason. We have some idea about what we're going to do. We've got to get it integrated into the product or integrated with other changes. We need to provide documentation, whether that's in the form of user documentation or, for regulated industries, something like that, an audit trail. We need to write our tests, and that test writing could be just the simple matter of creating a test case and automating or not automating, and then, of course, running the test. Right? So if you look at that work, I'm going to color code it here to make it easy. I've got little pieces of work, big pieces of work. I have a project with all it's just testing that a gradient has changed colors. Well, maybe you'd have a couple of tests there for each task, and then add that all together to be the full thing. So how does that generally work? Right, so we're going to have a big project. It takes us a while to get the project out the door. We're going to gather user requirements. Now here I'm going to talk about user requirements, but these could also be user stories, and we'll move to thinking about user stories. Doing is producing a version of what I call the telephone game, right? So the user asks for something, that then gets not only moved on to the next person in the telephone game, but also translated into, in this case, seems to make sense. But now time has been going by since the original request has been made. So let's think about that, right? So what we're going to produce is actually at the time we actually ship something, right? So the longer the time is between when somebody asks for it is that the value that we're hoping to produce has actually gone down, right? So then the architecture group produces an architecture document, and that then goes on to program managers and the managers or what have you who produce a giant Gantt chart, which then gets split up into multiple teams. They each have their project plan, which rolls up into the overall project plan. Then an integration. The problem here, though, is this tends to be very painful, right? We've done a whole lot of work. It's not integrated together yet. It's pretty far into the project. We're trying to get things to work for the first time. And because of the problems, we have to use this embedded database. Can we use something else? We didn't think this out to be cross-platform. I'm not sure the schema that you've designed is going to work here. All kinds of questions going back. And then the architect might say, and of course, believes that we need everything because that's what the users requested, and that's perfectly reasonable and understandable. But if they're feeling that push is coming to shove, they may go back to the customer and say, hey, did you really need it this way? Could we change? This number is no longer in service. Or, gee, I don't remember asking for that, right? So the longer the time period is here, the harder this gets, right? Because now if you're a developer or you know a developer, think about asking them how, you're probably going to get a good answer. What if it's code they wrote 3 months ago? How will they do? Probably not. 1 day, no problem. For a month, I have no idea, right? So we rely on these documents to provide this information, but really we often have to sort of go through the same process that we went through in the beginning to figure it out. At some point, we get the QA group involved, and they ask all sorts of pesky questions like, why doesn't this work? And do you really think anybody will understand this? And gee, this is terrific and it works great, but do you really think a response time of 2 minutes is gonna be good? And then eventually, of course, we get out a version of the product that we feel is going to be good. All right. So now if we look at any particular feature that anybody asked for, it has all these components, right? Specification, design, coding, integration, writing tests, documentation, and testing. But that work has been spread out over a very long period of time. And that introduces now the first best practice, which is required to understand and keep in one's head as far as what the value is and what we're trying to do. I'm not saying they're not valuable, they're just difficult. So now you won't be able to actually respond here, but just think to yourself, what is it that these requirements specify? What was it that the customer was asking for that produced these requirements? I'll give you a moment to just sort of, so usually what I hear at this point from folks in the live audience is, I think it's e-commerce. Isn't that e-commerce? Yes, it is in the e-commerce area. And to make it clear that often with requirements, the original need was obfuscated. It may be lost over time. So what this actually was is this, right? This is sort of the Amazon thing. Right? As a user, I want to order what I am browsing on a website. This is what I wish I had. It may be that you're providing software to a third party, and because your expertise is creating websites for e-commerce, and that's what they want. They say, you know, I want that Amazon thing, but it's for my business selling candles online, or whatever it happens to be. So if you're back looking at these requirements, and you're a QA person, and the developers have chosen to use a third-party library for some of the shopping components, and it requires three clicks, it may satisfy all these requirements. But does it provide the user value that's being looked for here, right? Your customer wants one-click purchasing, right? So if you're not providing that value, they may come back and say, that's fantastic, that's not what I want, try again, and you may have to throw out that library and get a new library. Spread out over time. Now, why does that really matter? And I sort of hinted at that the economic value that you're expecting a feature very rapidly and show it to somebody, and they say that's, you know, I have no interest in that now that I see it, you may be able to avoid doing more in that feature area now. And that will save you time. The other part of the feedback and the interaction, the conversations that are spread over a long period of time can now be compressed. problems, they're resolved right away instead of compounding over time. Right? Think about it this way. So a developer writes some code. It has a bug in it. He doesn't know it yet because it hasn't gotten the testing. And now I write some code based on the code that's already been written. What am I going to expect of that code? I expect that whatever it's doing is normal. So since it's not, it has this bug we haven't detected. My code, based on that code, is wrong. Right? So now I've gotten 2 bugs for the price of 1. Well, it will come back and bite me later. But the idea here is we want to do each of these pieces as fast as we possibly can. I want to know what the specification is. I want the design for that particular feature. I want it coded. I want the test cases written. I want it documented, integrated, and tested as fast as I possibly can. Now, you might be thinking at this point, interesting. I don't think that's going to work on our project. I'm not sure what project you're talking about. That's probably a small project. I've seen this work on huge projects, hundreds of users, globally distributed. It's a fantastic thing. It's not something that you can necessarily do right away, but this is something that can focus you on getting the value and the feedback out of the system that normally is hidden and lost. All right, so now this can be actually taken to a further extreme. To the other, as though they were each the most important thing I needed to do now, which would be like a hot fix, right? So you do hot fixes, patches, customer one-offs. What if you did everything that way? Right now, I know that may be sort of seem impossible at the moment. And let me back up for a minute. Here's an idea I want to give you, is that some of these practices require sort of a different way of thinking about software development. And individually, it may seem a little counterintuitive, but some of these practices work well together. When you're doing documentation or writing tests, you put that off until the end because who knows what development is actually going to come up with. I mean, we have this plan, but it always goes awry. What are they really going to do? We're going to put that off to the end. We're going to be more efficient. We don't want to waste time. But if the goal here is to get this user story done very rapidly, within days or a week, the chance of that not finishing, of those tests being written ahead of time being thrown out, or the documentation being written as you code being thrown out, is much, much lower. Plus, you get to take advantage of the fact that the developer remembers what he did and why he did it. And those pesky questions that come at the end can be coming in as the developer is coding, right? So this is much, much more of an efficient thing. It definitely works. And you may not be able to go this extreme right off, but to the extent you can, to the extent we have the front desk, we have the sales folks, we have the marketing folks, we have DevOps, we've got executives. We've got all, and they're spread across these 4 different locations, and we need to serve their basic IT needs, that kind of stuff. And we have a couple of conditions here. So at any particular location, they've got gigabit Ethernet. Now it might, but still, let's say it's high. Low latency, of course, because the server that, server to server is going to be right there. And it's not too long cuts a network cable within the building. Now between sites, let's say we have 2 to 4 megabits. Now some people have a little bit higher these days, especially between sites, but this is fairly typical. It's high latency, and it's not always available. I was talking to a customer at a group in Armenia, and apparently that can go down for a day or 2 at a time. Not too pleasant. For locations, how would you do that? Think about that for a moment. All right, good question. Now, if you have high-speed connections, maybe you would think about a centralized data center. But here are the circumstances that I've given you. It's only 2 to 4 megabits in between. Right? So if I put a server in Chennai location and put the extras where there's more people, and that makes great sense. Right? So we're co-locating the need with the hat on, our information computer hardware, not really our people hat. It might look like this. And collocation can sound like you're telling me I'm going to put everybody all together and in the corner of, no, not saying that. What we're saying is let's apply the same logic here, right? So instead of having all the developers in Kiev, testers in Chennai, and the doc writers too, and there's lots of different configurations here. Let's think about this rationally, right? So let's say, and I've got some bug I got to fix, and I'm waiting for somebody who's asleep to give me test results. So I go to another development system. How about you? Yeah, me too. Let's go to launch. Right, so perhaps not the best developers are co-located to each other, or that the testers are co-located to each other. Now, this is not always possible to do what I'm suggesting here, but you can co-locate teams, individual teams. Right, so now change, and this is not something that's easy to do in a short period of time. But I know one company that has 500 people globally, about 4 years ago, towards collocation and cross-functional teams, which I'll cover in a moment. It took a while. 4 years later, through and they work with Kiev, right? But it's low bandwidth, high latency connection. So hopefully, the kinds of problems that they're communicating back, like you broke the API, which happens frequently, hopefully, right? So this is a practice that you can use, right, to the extent that it's practical, and over time, hopefully, you can have your situation look like this. Cross-functional team is that we're going to put all of the individuals required of an individual project. Now, this would be 7 individuals plus or minus 2, so very small team, and I'm not teams of teams. Right, so you want to parcel out projects to the team where you have all of the skills necessary for that team to be successful, and they will sit near each other. Thus, much like one-piece flow or a whole team. Okay, so next up, testing. Now, everybody's heard of system testing and integration. Testing, and actually even unit. You know what? The intent of this, if I pass in these parameters, I get these results, has been met. It's working properly. Is it incents me to refactor my code so it's easier to do unit testing, and as I have, without too much fear of breaking it, because I've got all these great unit tests that are going to tell me right away that I've got a problem or not. Unit testing, this is going to be automated. It's going to work within a continuous integration system. Some of the systems out there are things like JUnit, JMock, NUnit, and NMock. Now, what is mock? Mock is, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. You can look into it. There are whole books on this. Mocking is a technique of saying, okay, good, but this particular method uses the database and bringing up the database. That's expensive. What if you mocked out the database? What if you add 1 to a row, right? So you can have a fake database there that says, I know when I'm being asked to add 1, I know how to return the results. That's all I'm doing, right? So that when you connect to the real database, you're going to be doing more testing. But if it can't even do that basic test, then why would you want to go any further with the testing? This will detect the, the trivial or mundane problems that can trip us up and keep us from finding the more serious problems, gets it right out of the way in an automated and fast way. Okay, so now what is refactoring? Right, now this is a technique that most people use, but it really works best when it's used in conjunction with unit tests and continuous integration. It's the basic idea that I've got code, but it's hard to write unit tests for it, or it's not maintainable, or I'm working on this particular requirement and it would be great to rewrite it. Open to addition. So you add new functionality by adding new methods. Now that's not always possible, but part of the idea of refactoring is to, if you have to change some code, think about, how could I restructure this so that I don't have to change it, but rather I can add. All right, now, again, you may be thinking, and this is perfectly understandable, I see this a lot, well, he's probably talking about, toy projects. Well, one way to illustrate what I'm talking about here is to use a very large project, which is out of our domain, and to think about something that does come from Agile, which is the principle called the simplest thing that could possibly work, which is often misunderstood to be the biggest shortcut we could possibly take. Well, let's take a look at what that means. So we've got 3 bridges here. I'm going to only be considering two on the right, and there's the one on the right is a landmark. So the business value, right, the customer value, in this case the town of Boston, the city of Boston, was that they had a landmark. Think about the code that we write. Often we are creating landmarks for no apparent reason. Right? We're putting in functionality there so that we don't have to change our code. We're writing code. We're basically writing code in cement, trying to make it so that that the code doesn't have to change in the future. But of course, that's ridiculous because next year we get a whole new set of requirements, and we have to change, code to make it easier to change because that's the reality. So back to the simplest thing that could possibly work. Both of these bridges, if you think about the basis over this water without people going in the drink, then it has to live, it has to last for quite a while. All right, so now looking at that, I think that's called a bolt-on, and in this case, literally. It turns out, I was talking to somebody, the reason that that's on, that traffic actually comes on and off in a short period. They didn't want to interfering with the traffic that's going across the bridge going somewhere. It doesn't need to intermingle. So the interesting thing is they try to make it beautiful. Would you really want to design this bridge and have somebody like me putting this picture up there and saying, doesn't that look a little funny? No, I don't think so. Right? Plus, it makes the math a lot harder, which makes it more expensive. Plus, you know what they did to divide the picture? Something called Jersey barriers, which are little cement blocks that are pretty ugly, right? So it was okay somewhere else, but they didn't want to do it. On this bridge. Now, because of this complaint, well, $11 million per lane, right? That's what that costs. You know what the simplest thing that could possibly work costs per lane? Right, so with 10 lanes, that's $60 million saved. So think about it this way. Instead of trying to, gold plating that somebody might need, do what they need today, right? Pocket that extra savings for some other investment, work that you know or hope that somebody might need. Right? So that's the basic idea there. So it doesn't go down far enough to see the Jersey barriers. So another thing that you can do here is this idea of splitting the, dangled money in front of me. Now, some of you may not actually have end user customers. You may only have, right? So you're providing the back end for an intermediate, right? You're sort of the back end, right? So still, there are multiple users somewhere, and that value that you're providing is so somebody else can provide value. Break it down into back-end infrastructure, a middle layer, a front end, right? So now I'm going to give you temporarily, just going to loan it to you. Let's see, I think $660 some, 220. I guess could have made it easier, 600,000. Right? Are you going to give me 200,000 for the back end if you're the customer? No way, right? What value can you get out of that? Or the middle layer, will you give me now 400,000? Nope, I'm not going to get that $600,000 until the whole thing is done. And even then, you might come back and say value. The idea is to say, well, even now that was a big project, but you can imagine a smaller feature, and I will do a little bit of the front end, a little bit of the middle layer, a little bit of the back end. That then gives you a little bit of the value. Will you pay for that? Right? Now, you might say, I'm not going to pay until I get more, but you might also at that point say, you know what? I don't think I need that value C and value D anymore. And even if you do, you may be thinking I have to make changes, but let me ask you this. Is efficiency the most important thing, or is it the final economic outcome? Because imagine you do 10 features efficiently, but people only want 3 of them, or 4 of them, or even 8 of them. Well, maybe 8 is too high. Let's say 6 of them. Wouldn't you rather produce, with the same level of effort, 8 features which are all wanted and have high value at the time you deliver them? So that's the idea. Don't think about the efficiency of think about the economic value at the end. So splitting work by value. Continuous integration is something that I just can't, I recommend, but continuous integration is something I just can't recommend highly enough. This is a great way to get started on modern techniques. There are a couple of requirements that you need: fully automated, one-step build used by everybody, etc. But this allows you to take those unit tests and put them in there, even if you've only got a couple, and that big bang integration at the end, which nobody likes. So what it does is it takes that integration period at the end, it's running around like crazy, and gives you more runway because it's going to be spreading that integration out for a longer period of time. If you've got continuous integration, you're running your unit, run and get the results, which is a good backup for refactoring, and that then feeds on it. Right? Over the time and continuously integrating them, you have the longer runway, and that is continuous integration. Now, that's on the mainline only, right? We normally think about, we've got, say, 6 developers on 2 teams. We've got 1 CI server. They're all checking into the mainline. Well, what if you had many more developers? Right, so that means that for Team A, for any individual in Team A to see the work that another team member is doing, they have to check in, which may break the build and affect Team B. Why not give each team their own branch or stream? Now you can do 3 continuous integration servers, continuous integration for each team and overall. So if Team A has something that's broken, can't even get through the gauntlet of working for their stuff, why should it go to the mainline and affect everybody else? Right, so you might be thinking, oh, branches, I really don't like branches, and I understand that. But the idea here is that things are moving as fast as you see here. Well, okay, this is sped up. But, minutes to check in, hours at the team level, and then daily integration of the multiple teams. So you're not going to really have a lot of issues there with merging and that kind of stuff. And this can be scripted and automated. Okay, and this can even be extended to once the whole product is integrated, why not move those changes onto another branch, which is the staging area, which keeps track of basically anything that makes it to staging is a known good quality. And then you can even have it further, which is it's gone through the final gauntlet, and this is something that we could ship if we wanted to, though we don't have to. So if there's any problems, you can then compare it against the staging or shipping area and see, oh, that's what changed. Okay, that might be the problem. All right, next up, managing priorities. All right, so this is pretty typical. You probably have something somewhere that looks something like this. Must-have, committed, very important. Now, this isn't severities. This is just priorities. This is, product managing has said, I have to have this in this release. And that priority 1, if you have some spare time, then get that done too. 2, yeah, it's got significant value, but definitely don't do that ahead of the 0s and the 1s, et cetera, right? We've all seen this. So here's my translation of this. Yeah, maybe, right? So because you get to the end and you have all these things you've asked for, they're not all going to get in there. we're running out of time. We got to cut something. So what does that mean for the others? Definitely not. Right? These have to migrate up to zeros for them to even be considered. No, we're not, who are we fooling here? So the idea, this next practice is something called backlog. So we're going to do backlog-based prioritization. For the things that are done and the things that are at the bottom of the things that are getting pushed, right? And if something new comes in that somebody wants, you say, well, is it more important than the thing at the top? No. More important than that one at the end? No. Well, that's good, because that one at the end, that's the end of the release. So you clearly just agreed with me that that's not going into this release. And if the person says, no, I have to have it, then you say, okay, are you going to increase resources, or are you going to move something else out? Oh, well, I don't want either of those. Okay, then again, I guess we agree that that's not going into this release. Thank you very much. The idea is that even though it may have a silly sounding name, it actually has a lot of value. So the idea behind a story point is that different people may story points is this basic idea. It doesn't matter what you call it. It happens to be called story points, where you separate your simplest task is going to be a 1 complexity on a relative scale. So it might take me 8 hours, and it might take you 2 hours. But the thing that needed to be done is the same. So here in New England, we all have sort of rocks in our front yard. Backhoe, the one with the backhoe, it's going to go faster, but it's the same number of rocks that need to be removed. Same idea. So now this one really seems like, whoa, we're going to be playing cards at work. That's how professional is that? Well, let's just go through an example. So the product owner is going to specify what it is that we're going to work on. The team, now this is a cross-functional team, right? So we've got the doc person on the right. We've got a developer, a tester, another developer. I think this is for the whole team. What is the whole effort, not just for their piece, for the one? And he says, oh, well, I just thought that was easy because we already wrote that code last year. And then the other person says, well, the reason I thought it was so hard from the code we wrote last year, that's true, so it's not a 13. How the braces work in this new language or what have you. It also brings the team together. The team came up with the estimate. They feel more committed to it. So now the next technique is something called velocity. And with velocity, this is how many story points is the team getting done over a set period of time. It could be a month, it could be weeks, it could be a week, whatever it is. So this gives you information to know story points, and not have to tie it back to hours. All right, so now bringing it all together, let's, whatever your workflow is, this is one example. If we're doing one-piece flow, we're using user stories, story points, planning poker, and velocity, we can move things through this work flow very rapidly. And if we're thinking about the one-piece flow, we only want to give ourselves credit for a job well done when a story is actually completed, right? It's a lot like football, and I know there's not a lot of football fans out there from my experience doing these lives, but we all know I can do without or whatever. So let's think about this. These practices can be used with whatever you're doing today, and that's fantastic. But let me put another thought in here, that if you take these practices, you just add a couple more, that is Agile. But regardless of what about Agile in the past, right, these all make sense, I hope. There's a few more to take a look at. Now, this, one word, it's a whole bunch of practices and things that go well together. And with that, I believe we're ready for questions.
Great. Thanks, Damon. So let me now take the number of great techniques that Damon just went through. So I have some questions in here. I'll read them into this Q&A panel, and then I will pose those questions just in a few minutes as you send them in. To Damon and take. So Synerzip is a software services company for small to mid-sized technology companies, typically venture portfolio companies, and we are technology and industry domain agnostic. But we work as a partner to our clients to help them expand their professionals, but we are not a staff aug kind of a company. We are actually very much a partner of high quality software development and help our clients expand their engineering teams. And because agile development techniques and good software engineering methodologies across the board, we actually help our clients reduce the risk. We bring that to the table for them. And not only are we able to reduce onshore operation, we have a development center in India and a product management and product owner kind of function on the US side. So with that, we are really able to provide a 50% cost advantage. And the last point about our value proposition is we allow our clients to convert the team that is working with them, Synerzip team, to convert. So that way our clients have the ease of working with us and not have to set up their own shop. And yet, here's a glimpse of some of our clients. So you see almost all our clients are small to mid-sized companies with a few larger ones, but by and large. With that, let's come back to taking some questions. So I have a number of questions here as I wade through them. Let's start with the first one, Damon. You went through a number of techniques which are all excellent techniques to improve the quality of software development practice. Other techniques are very appropriate to midstream adopt in an ongoing project. Can you help the audience with making which techniques in the pickup or the middle of a project?
Okay, that's a really good question. Okay, let me think about that here. So, it's probably one of the harder ones because that involves moving people. But if you're setting up a backlog and moving to user stories, get some continuous integration in there. A lot of people are doing unit tests already, so keep doing that. And then one-piece flow is really sort of a mindset. So that's something to think about and start adapting to, adopting as you go. That takes a while because that's a cultural thing. Adapt or adopt some of these things because you've already got the work for this project. So setting up a backlog, that's going to take you off track for a bit. But installing a continuous integration system doesn't take that long, and even if you don't have any unit tests, as you start adding tests, it's going to provide more value. So, writing a unit test might take 10 minutes. Right? So 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. And imagine that you have a couple of unit tests for, let's say you have 100, modules. Pretty soon, building up 200, that's not too hard. Now, that's not going to be enough, but the highest risk stuff, that's going to find problems right away and solve you, is start moving towards user stories. Now, if you have a whole bunch of requirements, that might not be slate them yourself into user stories. If you can't, well, now you have a value. So those are some of the things I would talk about, and I could probably go on at length about that. But
separate questions relating to planning poker that you covered, Damon. So the question is two parts. One is, what's the value of a non-development person to participate in the planning poker exercise, with the assumption being they really don't know the development complexity and the scope of what it will take. So why would you involve them? And the second is, how would you do planning poker across time zones if you have a distributed team, or do you not recommend doing that at all?
Okay, fantastic question. Part of the answer was actually in the question, which is, what is the value of having people outside understand, how things are working or fit together? There it is right there. So if you get somebody involved in planning through planning poker, their education about how things work and why they work that way is going to go up, right? So that as a QA person, I need that knowledge, right? So if I'm getting it right at the beginning, I could be thinking about that as I'm writing test cases. And I might even be thinking in that meeting the test cases for that user story. And then I'm going to tell you, guess what, guys? We don't have any test cases in that area. If that's really that important, we're going to have to write a lot of tests for that. And I think we should bump up the number here from 3 to 5, maybe even an 8. Right? So now I know, as the product manager, that task is going to be bigger than I originally thought. Now, that can work in a lot of different ways. It may be that the doc person says, oh, you know what, that's all documented. So I know you guys took in time for documentation, but I think you could knock that down a notch. Or the other way, right? So because to get this across the goal line requires everybody. That's not just developers. It's QA people. It's product management. It's managers. It's people in test. It's the DevOps people, right? They're going to be involved in telling you how much is it really going to take to get this from start to finish, right? Imagine it's a patch. To get that patch out, what is the total effort required from the whole team? Now, the second part is, okay, now that was a good answer, let's say, or I'm on board, and that's fantastic, but we're distributed. Well, obviously, it's going to be ideal if everybody's sitting together, but there are actually, if you look around, there are planning poker online, free ones even, for doing planning poker, which also preserves your privacy, your IP. So you can use planning poker online. But to the extent that you can, it may be that not the whole team is there, but you do the planning poker anyway. Put the scores up there, and then have other folks review what's going to be done and say, yeah, I kind of agree with that or not. And then if they don't agree, they can send in some emails saying, I think there's some information you should know about this before we get going.
Great. Okay, let's take another one, which is kind of interesting question. Do you think the techniques that you covered, Damon, can they work in a situation which there are actually no written requirements whatsoever?
No written
requirements.
I'm not sure I want to work in that project.
But there are, it's a collocated team, and people are, they get in the room and they do whiteboard discussions of what is needed. The product manager comes in, and those are known to exist, those entities. I worked in a couple of those. So how many of these techniques are really applicable, or can they, or would you rather have them address the root issue, which is...
Okay, well, let me think about that. So a user story,
Echo and amplify, our general observation is it's very important hygiene to have written requirements. You don't have to have very detailed, but you got to have written requirements. Okay, let's take last question before we wrap up, which is we hear...
Oh, okay. TDD goes, the idea of the unit test and the refactoring and the one-piece flow actually is, excuse me, a way to express the idea of TDD, because TDD really test-driven. I write a test before I write the code. That's test first, right? So that's very different than traditional in that we write the code and then a long time after that we write the test. So one of the main values of TDD is writing the test near where you write the code. And TDD, actually writing the test first, that's fantastic. But if you're even just writing it near when you write the code, that's got a lot of value. So with one-piece flow, right, you're trying to do things as fast as possible. And if you remember in that diagram that I had up there, we're doing development, design, coding, test writing, and testing all at the same time, and that really is TDD without saying TDD.
on our website in the next couple of days. You'll receive an email as soon as we have it available there, so you can look through it because this is an excellent reference document. So thank you again, Damon, and thanks everybody for participating.